Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my personal podcast tour of the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. Chandu the Magician, 1932. Like his friend Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi was catapulted to fame relatively late in life in 1931, in his case with the release of Dracula in February. But whereas they both had to accept what offers came while waiting for their star vehicle's impact to land, in the long term, Karloff was a shrewder judge and was able to negotiate from greater bargaining power. Lugosi struggled to keep the luster of his new name status polished, increasingly having to settle for lesser roles and lower pay in a gradual but inexorable downward spiral. He appeared in Chandu the Magician at a happier early point of fame the year after Dracula, following his memorable work in Murders in the Rue Morgue in 1932 and more notably White Zombie, in which he perfected his hypnotic Dracula stare into a trademark. Though Lugosi was not the titular star of Chandu the Magician, yet, as it turned out, it's a bracing and fun role for him in a decently budgeted, horror-tinged fantasy movie made by Fox. Chandu was an existing IP, coming off the back of a successful radio series written by Harry A. Earnshaw and Raymond R. Morgan that ran from 1931 to 36 in 15-minute episodes. Fox paid $40,000 for the rights. The hero is Frank Chandler, who studies the mystic Eastern arts to become Chandu the Magician, not for the purposes of a Vegas lounge act, but to fight crime, using hypnotism, solid matter transmutation, and astral projection. The format translated to film was similar, though without the spirited comic relief we will explore. The film itself would become a source of pop culture inspiration to DC Comics and to both Marvel Comics and their parent company Disney in two different memorable properties for the latter. I mention this now because the latter influence appears almost immediately in the film's prologue, in the form of Chandu's wise mentor Nigel de Brullier, with whom he ends 3 years of secluded study. According to IMDb, the Sorcerer in Disney's The Sorcerer's Apprentice was modeled on him. As Chandu, Edmund Lowe chugs along gamefully, giving him a relaxed charm and a fashionable Ronald Colman moustache. He is eternally grateful to his master, who bids him, "Go forth in thy youth and strength, and conquer the evil that threatens mankind." This he does, in a mission to use his powers as a supernatural crime fighter. We see the arsenal of weapons he has at his disposal in demonstrations of the Indian rope trick and firewalking. Can you guess yet who will become his target nemesis in the outside world? Yes, it's the glowering Lugosi as the fiendish Roxor. He makes a rather fetching villain, sleekly swathed in black and for the most part dialing down the theatrics. There's nothing low-key about his intentions, though. He's kidnapped inventor Robert Regent, Henry B. Walthall, for his Flash Gordon-style death ray. That Republic serial favorite wouldn't be around for 4 years yet, but this often feels like part of the franchise, especially with its insistent music score's dramatic stings. There's certainly more money and imagination let loose upon this film than expected. The set designs by William Cameron Menzies are superb, both in the Egyptian exteriors and the interiors. Menzies was a prized talent who won the first Academy Award in this field for The Dove and The Tempest in 1928. He co-directed Chandu the Magician with Marcel Varnell, before later being sole director on 15 movies himself, including sci-fi titles Things to Come in 1936 and his best-known work Invaders from Mars in 1953. That classic is still regarded as a benchmark in low-budget ingenuity. Here he channels similar resourcefulness in making the Chandu sets seem like they've been co-opted from much bigger movies. His silent movie design experience on The Thief of Baghdad in 1924 may well have helped in preparing the sumptuous columns, massive scale doors, and outdoor bazaar locations on show. In an epic laboratory scene of Roxor, if Lugosi's crackling cosmic diffuser looks familiar, that's because it is actually the uncredited Kenneth Strickfaden's device from Frankenstein, and is strikingly presented during an unusually elaborate descending angle from high above. This was the work of celebrated director of photography James Wong Howe, whose impressive career spanned from the silent era to the 1970s, including Yankee Doodle Dandy and Sweet Smell of Success, Not to mention, along the way, Todd Browning's Mark of the Vampire in 1935, again with Bela Lugosi. Back to the lab, and however, Roxor isn't content just with his existing toys. He craves mastery of Dr. Regent's death ray, so that I shall be greater than any pharaoh. Meanwhile, we and the intrepid Chandu are brought down to earth by a combination of tedious supporting actors, as his family members, and the more welcome Cockney comic relief provided by Miggles, his orderly from army days, played by Herbert Mundin. His chirpy charms were best used as Much the Miller's Son in The Adventures of Robin Hood opposite Errol Flynn, and in the famous Lawton Gable version of Mutiny on the Bounty. Miggles functions as a haphazard cowardly counterpoint to Chandu, one that increasingly often in this period was portrayed by demeaned black actors, as we've had to endure in earlier episodes. Miggles' own cross to bear is his inveterate alcoholism, which Chandu has a novel method for curbing, an astral projection of a mini Miggles, the size of a bottle. This challenging sprite aims to keep his alter ego on the wagon by nagging him with existential angst. If you're not yourself, how am I to know who I am? If you're not you, and I'm not me, then who are we? Neither of us. Logic like this is bamboozling enough to drive a man to drink. Sadly, Chandu can't shake off the spell of scriptwriters Barry Connors and Philip Klein's dreary love subplot dialogue with Princess Naji, former beauty queen Irene Ware. When you look at me like that, nothing else matters, he coos to her. When you have to listen to lines like this, anything else matters. Just when we need rescuing, so does Chandu's sister Betty, June Lang, who's about to be sold in a slave market while Roxor gloats from an upstairs window. By hypnosis, Chandu convinces the trader he's given him a bag full of money when it's actually a bag of frogs. Riveting work indeed. Roxor's dismissal of his new nemesis's skills, hypnotism, nothing more, comes off as sour grapes, since his talents seem to be restricted to forging counterfeit messages. By the time he's got his hands on Chandu in the last act, the villainous Lugosi has imperiled us as well as his hero. Imprisoned with Naji, the magician conjures up more nauseating heartstring twanging for her. I feel so much closer to you than ever before. Well, they are shackled in a cell together. From the frying pan into the fire, fiendish Roxor has Chandu taken and stuffed into a sarcophagus to asphyxiate him. That is, till his noticeably un-Arabic henchman Abdullah, Weldon Hayburn, points out that yogis train under such breathing disciplines. Roxor, however, has an evil trump card. But not underwater, he declares with glee. As Chandu's coffin descends to a watery grave, Chandu's family face their own imminent deaths, as their cell is about to collapse at the pull of a lever to drop them into a deep well. This is a perfect Republic serial cliffhanger, ultimately forcing Robert to show his kidnapper the death ray mechanics. Little does Roxor realize that the submerged Chandu can save himself as a master escapologist. He'd be even more impressive if he'd remembered to use this on the manacles back in the cell, but he can't be expected to spin every astral plate effectively. Meanwhile, Lugosi channels that classic mad scientist aria, "All that lives shall know me as master, and tremble at my word." He trains the death ray's beam upon Paris as a target. Perhaps he'd heard Chandu and Naji rhapsodizing about their romantic time there. As an afterthought, he will vaporize the mighty Egyptian dam, too. It's taken almost the whole movie, but finally hero and villain meet toe-to-toe, or rather turban to turban. What could have been a tasty paranormal wizard face-off, like Karloff and Lorre in Roger Corman's The Raven, instead results in Chandu putting an eldritch freeze on Roxor, while he messily duffs up Abdullah in one of those B-movie fights that looks more like a repeated collision than combat. Chandu and his family then escape just before the immobile Lugosi is left to be blown apart by the sabotaged death ray. After all that, even Miggles' protective mini-me admits he could do with a drink, and Chandu magically shrouds the moon behind the clouds for a crafty snog with Naji. Chandu the Magician is cheap and cheerful. Somehow there was enough in this material to stir the imaginations of Marvel Comics writer Stan Lee and his famous artist Steve Ditko to inspire them in the creation of the mystical superhero Doctor Strange in 1963, with an added dose of topical 60s psychedelia into the mix. It seems their rival DC was also stimulated by the material with their own astral creation, the criminal mastermind Sandor Fane. 3 months after Chandu's release, Universal unwrapped their own Egyptian-themed pure horror movie The Mummy in December 1931, starring Boris Karloff, and thus began a wave of mummified franchise spin-offs. Fox recycled their property themselves with a 12-part serial, The Return of Chandu, in 1934, this time with Bela Lugosi replacing Edmund Lowe in the title role, a rare heroic lead. Producer Sol Lesser intended from the start to release a full-length serial and then re-edit the footage with differently staged cliffhangers to form 2 feature films, The Return of Chandu, based on the first 4 episodes, then Chandu on the Magic Isle, taken from the last ones. The studio also reused the music score from Chandu the Magician, so evocative of Flash Gordon, for Charlie Chan in Egypt in 1935. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.